In the Middle Ages, giving birth wasn't a day at the spa. It was a potential death sentence. Roughly 1 in 3 women died in childbirth, and it was common practice to make a will upon discovering one's pregnancy. And this truth was even more brutal for queens. Absolute power could not buy safety, nor could fame ward off fear. Today, we will witness 12 horrifying and tragic, rarely told truths about deaths in childbirth. Prepare yourselves to hear the naked truth about the tragedies hidden behind the throne. The invisible killer, childbirth in the royal court. The general picture of danger, a life and death challenge. Childbirth in the royal court was no gentle ritual, but a battle for survival. From difficult labor and uncontrolled hemorrhage to preeclampsia, everything could go wrong in an instant. Royal birthing chambers, though lavishly adorned, often became the burial grounds for the hopes and lives of the noblest women. Puerperal fever, the invisible nightmare, the silent killer. Crucially, the lack of basic hygiene and disinfectants turned puerperal fever into a silent killer, claiming mothers' lives days after birth. In an era where bacteria were an alien concept, every childbirth carried an immense risk of infection. The hands of the midwife, the instruments used, or even the air in the room could all carry pathogens. A fever would flare up, accompanied by unbearable pain, signaling the end of a life that had just fulfilled its most sacred duty. Outdated medicine, deadly ignorance. Doctors of the time were completely ignorant of female anatomy. An astonishing common belief was that they even thought female reproductive organs were just male organs turned inside out. This ignorance led to medical interventions that were often more harmful than beneficial. They might use crude methods or give erroneous advice, pushing mothers into more critical situations. Each time a doctor intervened, the risk multiplied, turning those who offered hope into agents of tragedy. Royal pressure, a fateful curse, the reproductive mandate, the throne's ultimate burden. For queens, childbirth was not just a private matter, but the ultimate duty to produce as many children as possible, especially a male heir, to solidify the dynasty and ensure the royal lineage. This pressure weighed heavily on them from the moment they stepped into the palace, transforming marriage into a factory for producing heirs. Failure to produce a son could jeopardize their position, even leading to its forfeiture. The endless cycle, draining life force. Royal custom dictated refusing to breastfeed and entrusting infants to wet nurses, so the mother could quickly return to the marital bed. This meant they were constantly pregnant, exhausting their bodies and increasing the risk of death. Their bodies had no time to recover after each birth, making every subsequent pregnancy a new burden, a gamble with fate. Power is no shield, the privilege of death. Wealth and status not only failed to protect them, but, on the contrary, increased the risks. They had to adhere to strict royal customs and accept medical interventions that were often harmful. While common women might seek experienced midwives, queens were trapped with royal specialists who often delivered death instead of life. Were these invisible pressures, coupled with medical ignorance, the silent death sentence that queens faced, despite the precious crown on their heads? Did their very privileges become shackles, leading them to a more tragic end than ordinary women? The first tragedies, from Isabella to Mary Dubois, 13th to 14th centuries. Isabella of England. Daughter of King John, Isabella was married to Emperor Frederick II at just 21, a man 19 years her senior and twice widowed. This was a typical political marriage where love had no place, only power calculations and cold agreements. Upon arriving in Germany, Frederick II dismissed most of Isabella's ladies-in-waiting, confining her to his private harem, already filled with Arab women and guarded by eunuchs. Isabella was completely isolated, living under the absolute control of a strange husband and a foreign culture. During her 6 years of marriage, Isabella bore 4 to 5 children, at least one of whom died in infancy. The relentless cycle of childbirth drained the young woman's strength. Ultimately, she died at 27 while giving birth to her daughter. What was the hidden corner of this tragedy? Even the power of a great emperor could not protect his wife from a tragic and lonely death. Isabella, an English princess, suffered a cruel fate, imprisoned and stripped of both her freedom and her life simply for the duty of succession. Mary Dubois. Mary was an Anglo-Welsh noblewoman with a tragic childhood. She was kidnapped and forced to marry Henry, son of John of Gaunt, at just 12 years old. Although this marriage was initially intended to be unconsummated early, fate cruelly intervened and she became pregnant at 16. In her short life, Mary bore 7 children, but her firstborn lived only a few days. The death of a young mother. Mary died at 26 while giving birth to her daughter Philippa. Her death was just the beginning of a series of life shocks and an unexpected, fateful legacy. Just 5 years after her death, her husband became King Henry IV, who killed his cousin Richard II to seize the throne. Her eldest son became Henry V, the great warrior king, hero of Agincourt. Even more astonishingly, both of Mary's daughters, Blanche and Philippa, also died from childbirth complications. Was this a hereditary curse or a testament to the impermanence of fate even within royal bloodlines, where childbirth tragedies haunted them across generations? Mary Dubois' fate was a personal tragedy, but it also reflected a brutal reality of the era. Childbirth was a fragile line between life and death, regardless of status or origin. Isabella of Valois. Daughter of King Charles VI of France, Isabella married Richard II of England at just 7 years old to end the 100 Years' War. A peace treaty built upon the childhood of a little girl. Richard II, 22 years her senior, had a special relationship with Isabella, often visiting and conversing with her and her ladies-in-waiting in a friendly and respectful manner. However, a controversial truth is that Richard was famously known to prefer the company of men he loved. Did this relationship affect the lack of shared children, or was it merely a fateful coincidence, given that gay kings often struggled to produce heirs? Tragedy continued. Richard was assassinated 4 years later. Isabella was put under house arrest by Henry IV and refused his offer to marry his son. The death of the teenage bride. She married a second time to her 11-year-old cousin Charles, Duke of Orleans, and at 19, Isabella died, giving birth to her first daughter. A death too soon, leaving much to ponder about the fate of pawns in the game of politics. Elizabeth of York. Daughter of Edward IV, Elizabeth was abducted and forced to marry Henry VII, who had defeated Richard III, to unite the two warring factions in the Wars of the Roses. What seemed destined to be an unhappy marriage, fate painted a different script. Despite its forced beginning, they had a very happy and loving marriage. Elizabeth was a beloved wife and mother, staying away from politics. This shows that fate's script doesn't always follow the rules, but this fragile happiness hid tragedy. She bore 7 children, but 3 of them died in infancy. The climax was the death of her eldest son, Arthur, the heir to the throne, at 15. She died on her 37th birthday from an infection after giving birth to her 7th child, Catherine, who lived only a few days. Henry VII and his children grieved deeply. The depiction of Prince Henry, later Henry VIII, weeping beside his mother's empty bed, is a haunting image, showing how the pain of loss shaped the future of this infamous king. Was it perhaps his mother's death that sowed the seeds of Henry VIII's obsession with a male heir, an obsession that would lead to horrifying tragedies later? Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife, his only hope for a male heir after he had executed Anne Boleyn and divorced Catherine of Aragon. The pressure on her to produce was immense. The entire kingdom placed its hopes on Jane, and Henry himself was desperate for a male heir. After 3 nights of agonizing labor due to a breech birth, she gave birth to Edward, Henry's dream prince. The entire court erupted in joy, but that joy was short-lived. A few weeks later, she died of puerperal fever due to severe infection during childbirth. Jane Seymour was only 29, queen for just 17 months. She was the only wife Henry buried with full honors, and he truly grieved for her. But her death showed the impotence of absolute power against crude medicine and the brutal burden of succession. Did Henry realize that his own obsession indirectly pushed Jane to her death? Was Jane's sacrifice a curse for Henry when the son he killed for turned out to be short-lived? Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's 6th wife, twice widowed. She married Henry not out of ambition, but because she had no other choice. having intended to marry the man she loved. Just when she thought she had escaped the political whirlpool, fate pushed her into the dangerous court of an aging and tyrannical king. After Henry died, she married the love of her life, Thomas Seymour. At 35, she became pregnant for the first time, having never conceived in her previous 3 marriages. But Thomas Seymour, her husband, openly flirted with Princess Elizabeth, and Catherine even caught them embracing. A late love ended in painful betrayal, tragic death, and the fate of her child. She gave birth to a daughter, Mary, but just 6 days later, she died of puerperal fever due to poor hygiene during childbirth. Thomas Seymour was executed for treason. Baby Mary, 7 months old, was abandoned, vanishing from history. Catherine Parr's death was not just the end of a life, but also a testament to the fragility of happiness, the tragedy of power, and the devastating consequences of undeveloped medicine. Was this a curse for the women tied to the Tudor dynasty, that even escaping Henry, they could not escape tragedy? The last hope, Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales. George III's granddaughter, she was the sole hope for the future of the British monarchy. Beloved by the public, she was the Will and Kate of her era. All eyes were on this beautiful and talented princess, placing the burden of an entire dynasty on her shoulders. Charlotte's uncles all lacked legitimate children, placing an enormous burden on her to produce an heir to the throne. The monarchy desperately needed a successor, and Charlotte was the last hope. Even in the 19th century, medicine still had many limitations, especially in obstetrics. Doctors worried Charlotte ate too much and exercised too little, yet they hesitated in treatment, constantly changing her diet, which weakened her. During 2 days of difficult labor, the male accoucheur, Sir Richard Croft, refused to use forceps to speed up the process, fearing infection, a decision that may have cost both mother and child their lives. A risky gamble between safety and speed, and they chose wrong. The tragedy of the fateful night. Finally, she gave birth to a 9-pound son who, sadly, was stillborn. Charlotte accepted the news calmly, seemingly past the critical point. But this was just the beginning of the final tragedy. Hours later, she vomited violently, suffered abdominal pain, uncontrolled hemorrhage, and died at 2:30 a.m. A sudden and shocking death, stealing the hope of an entire nation. Grief spread throughout the country. Every family felt as if they had lost a beloved child. Shops ran out of black fabric, and ports and courts closed in mourning. Accoucheur Richard Croft committed suicide 3 months later due to pressure and guilt. An indirect death showing the burden of this tragedy did not stop at the palace. This death led to major changes in obstetrics, more widespread use of forceps, earlier intervention. Personal tragedy became a catalyst for medical development. More importantly, it forced Charlotte's uncles to abandon their mistresses and marry to race to produce an heir, leading to the birth of Victoria, the great queen of a new era. Was Charlotte's death a tragic but necessary turning point to reshape England's destiny? From Isabella to Charlotte, these queens, despite their noble status, could not escape the brutal fate of life and death. Their deaths were not just personal tragedies, but also profound reminders of the fragility of life and the impotence of power against natural laws. These stories have unveiled the truth about what happened behind the glamorous palace walls, a truth rarely known but full of pain and meaning. We have seen the contrast between the outward splendor and the agony and loneliness that queens endured. Which queen's story impressed and made you reflect the most? In your opinion, what was the biggest cause of these tragic deaths? Backward medicine, immense royal pressure, or simply cruel fate? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. We always look forward to hearing your perspective. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other unique and dramatic historical stories from Mr. Q. See you in the next video, where we will continue to uncover the hidden truths behind history.